Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy, the host of the best show in Fairbanks, brushing my teeth to Mersbo on KSUA 91.5 Fairbanks, Alaska. Today's intro song was a 20-minute masterpiece by the band called Godspeed You, Black Emperor. I chose them because they are a very political band despite being mostly instrumental. And they have stated recently that they sided with Palestine and the Palestine-Israel conflict. And wouldn't you know it, we're going to be talking about politics. So if you thought last week's show was bad and noisy, this is probably not going to be any better for you, but I think it's important to talk about it. Today's subject is the Palestine-Israel conflict. I'm going to be joined with my friends Sam and Tom. We pre-recorded this on Sunday, so any new developments since then we don't talk about. This part right now I'm recording today on Tuesday, and I don't think there's been anything too significant. But in the talk, I function as more pro-Palestine and heavily critical of Israel. Sam is more pro-Israel, and Tom tries to be sort of a both sides kind of guy. I wish I pushed harder against Sam in regards to Israel's civilian bombings and just general treatment of Palestinian citizens. I don't want to misrepresent him here, since this part is separate from our talk, so he can't really defend himself. But he often seemed to condemn the killing of Palestinian civilians, but believes there's no other choices. And I heavily disagree with that. I'm much more critical, and I wish that I did a better job of criticizing Israel and defending Palestine. Now, one thing I want to bring up before we get into the talk is that Sam and Tom are both rightfully very critical of Hamas. I'm also critical of Hamas due to civilian bombings. However, it's interesting to note, and I didn't know this during the talk, which is why I'm bringing it up now. It's interesting to note that some of our allies, or countries you would think are our allies, like Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, classify only the military wing of Hamas as a terrorist organization. And even Norway does not consider it a terrorist organization at all. Obviously, there's some Middle Eastern countries like Egypt and Iran and Syria who don't consider it a terrorist organization, but I wouldn't trust their opinions too much. But it's interesting that Australia and the UK only consider the military wing a terrorist organization, and Norway does not consider it a terrorist organization at all. And one point that gets brought up a lot is that since Hamas is a terrorist organization, they cannot be trusted to abide by the rules of a ceasefire or negotiate a ceasefire. And I just want to point out that since 1994, the group has frequently stated that it would accept a truce if Israel withdraws to the 1967 border, which is the border of the original two-state solution, paid reparations, allowed free elections in the territories, and give Palestinian refugees the right to return. Which, I find these conditions very fair if it was an end to the conflict. Hamas said this would only be a 10-year ceasefire, which I don't agree with. I think this would be good enough for just an end to the conflict overall. But still, a decades-long ceasefire is much better than the conflict that's going on right now. And one last thing is that Sam often brings up how Hamas will constantly break ceasefires, and kind of implying that Israel doesn't break ceasefires. And I'm not trying to misrepresent Sam. It's not really fair that I'm bringing this up and he's not here. You can listen to the audio yourself and decide whether or not I'm representing Sam's views here correctly or not. But I want to point out this article from IMEU, Institute for Middle East Understanding, which is actually an American institution. They list conflicts from 2012 all the way back to 1949 in which Israel was the instigator and nation that broke the ceasefires. For example, this one's from 2012. On November 14th, 2 days after Palestinian factions in Gaza agreed to a truce following several days of violence, Israel assassinates the leader of Hamas's military wing, Ahmed Jabari, threatening to escalate the violence once again after a week in which at least 6 Palestinian civilians are killed and dozens more wounded in Israeli attacks. I know it's not entirely fair that I'm bringing this up and Sam can't argue with it. However, I just want to point out that Hamas does try to negotiate ceasefires, and Israel is just as guilty in breaking the ceasefires as Hamas is. And I only bring this up now because it's something I want the listener to keep in mind and because I didn't know about it during our conversation. With that, I will get into the show. I hope you learned something, you lovely listeners out there, and let's hope this conflict can be resolved soon enough. I don't think it will, but we can hope for the best.
I think we're gonna get started. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess the good way to start out would be to just say your name and maybe your opinion going into this, and
any qualifications we have,
and your qualifications, maybe your religious background too, if you're willing to say that. So I'll go first. I'm Jimmy, the host of the show, non-religious. I feel very confident in my knowledge of the Israel-Palestine conflict, but I think that that's just overconfidence, and I shouldn't be as confident as I am. Tom, you want to go next?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Jimmy. My name's Tom. I am Catholic, and as far as my knowledge of the Israel-Palestine conflict goes, I am very interested in the international humanitarian law side of things. However, I think it's important to remember that as we are detached from the situation, everything we say is very subjective, and we, of course, are not the most involved in the situation.
I mean, some of it's subjective, but some of it is war crimes.
Some of it is facts, and that is what I'm hoping to focus on here to avoid too much editorialism.
Okay. Our third man here, I don't know if he wants to use his real name or not. He said he was nervous.
Yeah, you said no names, Jimmy. My name is Sam. There we go.
Okay.
Out of the hat. I'm a Reformed Jew, not all that religious, but still pretty ethnically and culturally. I'm the only one in the group who's actually been to Israel out of this, so I don't know if that qualifies me or dequalifies me. I think I'm well informed on the topic. I took a history of the modern Middle East class about a year or two ago. I try to read the news, I read the articles, and I still keep in contact with some friends I made in Israel, so I get their opinion every now and then on things as well. I think I'm a little qualified, but not as qualified as Jimmy.
I wouldn't say that. I think you could be just as qualified as me. I don't maybe have the academic background on this. I just have been claiming.
It was a summer class 2 years ago, so I don't know how much of that I retained.
Well, I don't have any classes, and I've just been complaining about Israel for years. And finally, we've come to another point where the conflict is escalated, and I have a radio show. So combine the two, we're going to talk about Israel.
You must be qualified.
Yeah, it's actually the highest rated radio show in Alaska, so
wow,
that makes me qualified.
Can you say that on your own radio show?
I say that all the time. No one has stopped me so far.
I'll back you on that claim.
Yeah, but yeah, we're 3 white guys with different religious backgrounds, and we're going to talk about Israel. I'm just going to give us a little overview of what I plan to talk about, and if you guys think that sounds good, we can do that. But I'm going to be I'm the host because it's, my show. I'm going to be trying to moderate, but also this could get very heated. So I'll try to keep it cool. But for
you have to moderate yourself.
I do. It's going to be hard, but I'll try to stay calm. But I want to talk about what's been happening recently, first with the evictions, and then with Israel targeting civilian buildings and the media. And then we can go into more details about the Israel-Palestine conflict in general. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about what we see for the future, whether it's optimistic or pessimistic. And then finally, I really want to look at some of this Israel propaganda that I've been looking at recently on r/Israel. They've got some pretty good stuff over there, and that's just, I feel like we need to talk about it because that's something
I might have posted some of that.
Oh, well, hopefully we get to see your thing. But I think the propaganda is something we can all agree on and laugh at the end and join in together in unity.
Yeah.
Let's see. So I guess the first thing we have to do is talk about what's been going on with the evictions. And I guess my first question will be to Sam and just say, do you think these evictions are legitimate? Do they follow in accordance with the law?
Well, I'm not a law expert, but from my understanding of it, it's kind of a yes and no situation. And this is where I think maybe my background will be a little bit of help. Just in the founding of Israel, we go back like 100 years ago. Even before World War II, a lot of people conflict that World War II was really the start of the modern state of Israel, which isn't entirely true. A lot of Jews in Eastern Europe, especially during the Russian Tsar era, were starting to emigrate over to what they deemed was their homeland, Israel. What a lot of people know is the Zionist movement. And how that worked is sometimes they settled, sometimes they took land. But in a lot of cases, they actually bought land this is where I don't know if it was the British government in control at the time or from locals who own their own land. But in a lot of cases, they came in and they bought land out. And then it's, of course, there's a lot of ethic objections to it, but just legally, if you're buying the land, then you have the right to rent to who you choose. And so I think in some ways, it's like a very sinister form of gentrification where they move into neighborhoods and then they force out people they don't want there. And then they bring in people with land programs into that area. Kind of, I think a similar analogy to it is what America did with trying to move people out west with, pretty much dirt cheap land. Whoever got there first got it. But of course, the area of Palestine, Israel was a lot more densely populated than the American West was. And so then if we fast forward to now, from what I've seen is that this is pretty much what happened in that area. So I think in the 30s or 40s, there was a Jewish trust that came in and bought the land, and then they've been renting to Palestinians since then. And then they came in this time and basically forced people out and said, we're not going to rent to you anymore. So on one hand, you have a legal justification that, yes, this is my land. I can rent to who I want to. But then the ethic justification of it just isn't there. So you're pretty much, picking and choosing who you want there based on ethnicity, which I think forces, a lot of ethical questions that people have disagreements with. And then I'm not sure, again, I'm not a law person, but from what I've seen is that there's also questions about the legality of the land settlement. So, on one side, you have people claiming that it was bought legally and that they've held ownership. On another hand, there's questions about the legitimacy of the, land papers and whether or not it was actually purchased or taken. So from my understanding, those are the two sides. So one side you have the legal side that, yes, we bought this and we can choose who to rent to. But then the ethics side of that is, whether or not it's justifiable to pick by ethnic group, which I don't think so.
Okay. Tom, you can chime in whenever you want, but I think ethically we're all in agreement that this is a terrible thing. But also legally, I said Tom can chime in because we did a little bit of research together, but Israel claims the land, and then they can, under their law, they can evict whoever they want. But the Palestinians don't consider themselves subject to Israeli law, while the Israelis claim the land and are evicting them.
Well, I think if you're going on that foot, though, then if they don't recognize Israeli law, even though, let's say it was sold to them, let's say that was a legit claim, then at that point you just have a lawless area. And so if you're not recognizing the power of the party in rule at the time, and you're kind of going into a lawless state, and I think that opens up a whole other can of worms.
It's not a lawless state. It's well, I guess it is a kind of a lawless state because there's Israel and then there's the state of Palestine, which is mostly ruled by the IDF.
I think when you look at East Jerusalem, which was officially annexed in 1980 after Israel, and then Israel declared the entire city as their capital, them claiming that isn't necessarily recognized by a lot of other countries. So although they claim, I don't think anybody disputes that East Jerusalem is under Israeli control now. But as far as the entirety of Jerusalem being their capital, I think is widely disputed.
It's been recognized by, it was recognized first in America by Trump, right? Because he was like rabidly pro-Israel for some reason. But most countries...
I can tell you why.
But I would imagine that a lot of those legal debates over the evictions probably happened starting in 1980 after the annexation was official and complete and they announced that capital city.
I would argue they started at the creation of Israel when they were invaded by all the surrounding countries.
You mean like when they originally got East Jerusalem or earlier than that?
The very founding, and then there was the Yom Kippur War. I would say that would be a pretty big international dispute about who owns what land.
Well, the Yom Kippur War, that was after the 6-Day War, which is when they got East Jerusalem. Yom Kippur War is just defensive.
I would say that both of those were land disputes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. To put it very mildly.
They got East Jerusalem in 1967 with the 6-Day War, and then the Yom Kippur War in 1973, they just defended it and held on to it. And then following that in 1980, they claimed it to be their capital.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say the area for a long time.
I don't know if I would say they control it. I would say it's occupied. I don't think, because they're not like trying to move anybody into East Jerusalem, at least that I've seen. I don't know if you have evidence otherwise.
Isn't East Jerusalem where the evictions are occurring?
Yeah, that's where the evictions are occurring right now. They're moving people into... Is it okay? Okay, quick break. Is it okay if I say Jews? Sam, you think that's okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Wait. It depends on the context.
I was just about to say they're moving Jews
Israeli
into East
nationals
right now.
I would say Israelis.
Okay.
Israeli nationals.
You can include this as long as you're not saying things like dirty Jews. I'm cool with it.
But
this is where I would give you a clarification.
I'll include it. It's a learning scenario. I'm learning.
And this is from a Jewish perspective. Is that saying all? Well, there's what a lot of people don't understand about Jews, and because most people think of Judaism as a religion, which it absolutely is, but it's also very much like an ethnic group and kind of like a cultural history. Just because they've been moved around a lot and kind of isolated to wherever they were, and so even like for example, like my family immigrated over from Eastern Russia, but to call them Russians wouldn't be accurate because they weren't mixing with Russian culture. It was kind of you were separated off from the rest of it. And so where that gets confusing here is that you have Jews who are Jewish, who are, who you call Jews, but then you also have like cultural Jews who don't practice, and who have moved to Israel. So I think, saying Israelis is a little more accurate because it makes it less about a religious push and more about kind of like a cultural push, which I think is more of what it is. So it's not, there's certainly people who are in the party who, or even in power in Israel who are very much, it should be, a Jewish state, we should abide by Jewish laws and, the word of the Torah is the word of God. But then there's also other Jews who are, we should have this as a cultural land, who, you can debate it, of course, but who have, looked at, we've been isolated here, persecuted here. It'd be nice to have a land for once. And that's where a lot of it comes from. And that's where the Zionist movement comes from. And this is actually a big thing, is that there's not really any justification for Zionism in the Torah. You can say, it's our land, you can look at it there, but there's no explicit text in there that says like you have to like do it. And there's the point that I'm making is that there's no religious justification for it. It's much more of a cultural thing. And so to say they're moving Jews there because they're Jewish isn't accurate, but to say, you know, they're moving people maybe of Jewish heritage or even who, you know, are living in Israel and sympathetic to it, I think is more accurate.
Okay. Well, they're moving the Israelis.
I would say Israelis, yes.
They're moving the Israelis into the formerly Palestinian parts of East Jerusalem, which,
yes,
in my view, is not really legal.
Well, it's legal under Israeli law.
It's legal under Israeli law. It's not recognized by international law, which I feel is more.
Well, there's very few parts of this entire scenario that are, you know, acknowledged to be okay by international law.
I have one more thing I meant to bring up earlier in my discussion. I totally forgot. Is that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? They're currently trying to form. Yeah, I won't debate that. Is that they're trying to. He's done an election there. They've been trying to form and fail a government for the last couple years, and so a lot of people view this as, you know, it's a tried and true effort, start a war, unify the country. And so that's one of the theories of why, like, the big question is why now? And that's one of the leading theories is, you know, they've been trying and failing to form a government. And so it's an easy war target. I imagine that he would see it as an easy victory as well. So it's not like you're picking a fight that, you know, might get ugly. They view it very much as a very winnable scenario. And so easy, good PR.
That makes sense. I didn't realize that.
I mean, of course, that's not substantiated by anything, but it's a theory, and, you know, it's hard to prove it, but it's also hard to disprove it.
It makes a lot of sense. That's right. What some people were arguing when Trump assassinated the Iranian general, right? Some people made an argument that Trump was trying to start a war in order to secure his second term.
I mean, it makes sense, and it also, you know, has proven to be a very effective tactic in the past as well.
Yeah. I mean, Putin's doing it like almost constantly now.
Yeah, but Putin, he is not going to like lose an election no matter what.
Right.
He has some control over that.
I mean, I don't know if there'll be another election after the term extensions that just happened in Russia.
He'll win with 110% approval, 110% of the vote share.
People from outside Russia vote to support Putin.
But not to get too far off track.
Right.
Hey, I'm moderating. Okay, not to get too far off track, but so the evictions, I don't know if we're agreeing on that much, but legally it's kind of wishy-washy. But then I think something that is a little bit more obviously wrong is that Israel has been targeting civilian buildings in their attacks, and they recently targeted a media building. They claim that they were harboring Hamas fugitives or whatever, but there's been no proof that Hamas was housed in any of these buildings so far. I don't know. Do you have any takes on that?
Yeah, I have a take, I suppose. Underneath the Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions, the targeting of civilian infrastructure and the targeting of journalists are actually separate things. So if you were to take it from that point of stance, I suppose they could be considered separate infractions. But when something like this happens and in the aftermath of it, it's impossible to substantiate whether or not they were correct. It becomes kind of a moot point since there's no word to go off of besides their own, since, you know, you can't exactly ask anybody else.
Well, it doesn't even matter that whether or not Hamas was in the building, because you can't target civilian structures. Targeting civilian structures at all is a war crime. And I have this article. Maybe I'll share this article on the screen.
Can I put an opinion in first before you share it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my opinion on it is, I think it's on Israel to bear the burden of proof that there was Hamas activity there. But that's a very common tactic that they use, is to store things in non-obvious sites because it makes them harder to detect and harder to destroy as well.
Sam,
yeah, go ahead.
If I could offer a counterpoint about the
can I finish my point first?
Absolutely.
Okay. So as I was saying before, I was rudely interrupted. I think it's a common tactic they use, and they've been caught doing it before. It very substantiated claims. So my take on it is that if they were housing, knowingly or unknowingly, if Hamas was housing weapons there, I think it's completely justified to destroy the building. I know one thing that I think, Jimmy, you brought it up previously outside of this conversation, was that it was a short window of notice. And you were criticizing that. Am I correct on that?
I don't know if that was me, but
maybe it's somebody else. Well, that's a criticism others have offered.
Yeah.
Whether or not Jimmy said it or not. And I think that's a fair point, but I think the counter argument to that, and the counter argument that I support, is that you don't want to give enough notice for them to be able to move out any weapons or equipment in the building. So I think as long as there's enough time to get human life out of there, I think it's justifiable if they can prove Hamas involvement there. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so a point that I think that I don't agree with, but one that I think could be offered up, is as far as bearing the burden of substantiation for Israel, I don't know if they necessarily need to justify attacks on civilian infrastructure and press buildings as a result of them actually not signing Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions, which is what touches on those different parts. So technically, they never agreed to not do it, which I think might contribute to why their substantiation is minimal.
Yeah, Israel really not signed the Geneva Convention?
They signed the 1949 Geneva Conventions that pretty much every country has signed, but they did not sign the 1977 Protocols 1 and 2. Which Protocol 1, Protocol 1 is an expansion on international conflicts, and Protocol 2 is the national conflicts. But Protocol 1 is the one where you hear a lot of the main international humanitarian stuff.
So let me ask you a follow-up question.
Yes.
I'm not going to argue that we shouldn't be bombing civilian buildings, but at what point does a civilian building no longer a civilian building if they're housing weapons in there?
Well, see, I think that is a concern for some nations that do agree with the Geneva Conventions, because technically, I think as long as there's civilian population within those buildings, they are always considered civilian infrastructure. I don't think that there is a point where it suddenly becomes a military infrastructure of the opposing nation unless, the civilian population has been barred from entry. The thing is that when you have a situation like this, because obviously the organization of Hamas has not also signed the Geneva Conventions. If Israel had signed the Geneva Conventions, it would be on them to essentially be the bigger party and not target buildings if there's even a chance of civilian casualties involved in them, which possibly, I suppose, could contribute to why those remain unsigned by them. I will state that the national state of Palestine, so not Hamas, but the national state of Palestine actually did sign every protocol of the Geneva Conventions, but they are also not the ones involved in the current conflict.
Yeah.
I have two follow-up on that. The first one, I already lost the first one. Sorry. It'll come back to me. The second follow-up, though, is that if you can just kind of stick civilians in a building in order for it to not get bombed, that almost sounds like a hostage situation where you're just kind of using people as human shields.
Well, you see, Sam, sticking civilians into a harm's way during wartime is also a war crime.
Yeah. Like we're obviously judging Israel a lot for it's not technically war crimes since they didn't sign the Geneva Convention, but I think we should hold them to a high standard. So we're judging them for their war crimes. Obviously, Hamas has committed a ton of their own war crimes.
And is an internationally recognized terrorist group.
Yeah, yes, and they are putting civilians in danger.
They are a terrorist group. We already know that Hamas is a terrorist organization and that they're the bad guys. But Israel, they don't get enough flack for their war crimes, and I think part of that is because America just so blindly supports Israel with funding and
you think it's blind
attitude. I think it's starting. People are starting. I don't want to sound too pretentious, but people are starting to wake up as of lately.
Good job on not sounding pretentious.
Thank you. I think people are starting to wake up, but it has been blind for a pretty long time.
Do you want to share your article, Jimmy?
Yeah. Well, first I'll just point this out. These are some rules in war crimes. I think this is Protocol 1.
Yes.
Civilian objects shall not be the object of attack. So that's pretty clear. An international criminal court intentionally directing attacks against civilian objects, that is, objects which are not military objectives, constitutes a war crime in international armed conflicts. But that wasn't the article. The article I want to point out is this article where attacks on civilians' infrastructure in Syria might be war crimes. And this is Russian-backed Syrian forces in northwest Syria. So they're Russian-backed bombings. And the United Nations, this is an article from 2019, the United Nations was calling for an end to the bombings, and they're saying it constitutes a war crime.
Is it in the Golan Heights?
I don't know where it is, but Syrian forces has been bombing civilian infrastructure, and the United Nations has no problem calling that out. But when it comes to Israel, I don't think the United Nations has done much in trying to call out Israeli war crimes. And also, just a quick aside, Russia pulled out of the Geneva Conventions in 2019.
They did.
So they're also
an interesting move.
Interesting move, to say the least. But I just want to point out that the United Nations has no problem calling out Russian war crimes, whereas Israeli war crimes have been going on for decades.
Jimmy, I'd have 2 points to make about your statement there. Number one, I don't know if the United Nations historically can necessarily be attributed to a blanket view of the conflicts throughout the world. I think there are things that they focus on. And Russia, with the concerns that happened there, I think has been much more of a historical area of concern for the UN, compared to at least the Israeli conflict. And then secondly, I would offer that there is a difference between indiscriminate attacks and deliberate attacks against civilian objects, because Protocol 1, as you stated earlier, involves attacks on civilian infrastructure and objects, which I would offer is different than indiscriminate attacks, which fall more underneath total war. So total war being much more of a concern for a organization like the United Nations.
Maybe, but I would argue that the United Nations is mainly focused on Western interests, and
I agree with you.
The Russian plight or whatever they have going on is not really much of a Western interest. So they're more ready to call out something like that than things that go on in Israel. But yeah, they're targeting civilian infrastructure, and recently, well, not recently, but once again, they're targeting the media buildings, which both, I'm just going to say again, both are war crimes. But in the case of the media, I think it was 2 media headquarters that were there, which is one was the AP
and Al Jazeera.
Yeah, Associated Press and Al Jazeera, which one Associated Press is like an American news thing. And then the Al Jazeera is an Arabic news headquarters. And Israel, they bombed that, but they also have a history they have a kind of a shady history with the media. This article from AA, what does AA stand for? I don't know.
Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah, the Alcoholics Anonymous are very, very interested in this conflict. Can we figure out what that stands for really fast? No, it doesn't say, but it doesn't matter. AA.com.
I feel like it ought to matter at least a little bit.
Okay, if anybody's interested, AA.com.
I'll look it up.
Okay, thank you. But the article is titled Israel's Long History of Targeting Journalists. Since 1992, a total of 15 journalists have been killed by Israeli fire. And it's interesting because it's not accidental that journalists have been targeted. The
Anadolu Agency.
The Anadolu?
Yeah, I think it's the Turkish.
That's I don't want to give too much credit to Turkey. They have a kind of a shady history on their own. But
Turkey, huh?
So I read that these aren't journalists that were killed in the line of fire by accident. It's been admitted that the journalists were killed on purpose. They had the helmets that say press on them, and they were still killed. And then they have 28 Palestinian journalists currently held in Israeli prisons, many of whom have yet to face trial. This article was...
Real quick, the Anadolu Agency is the official press agency of the country, so I think it might be state-sponsored.
Okay.
It's state-run.
Now, if I could offer a point maybe from something that's not state-run, well, still staying in line with this topic, very recently, earlier this week, we received a bunch of media reports that Israel was gearing up for a ground invasion into Gaza. And then we found out yesterday that those media reports, based off of information provided to them by the IDF, were actually false and was part of a IDF military tactic to lure Hamas militants into defensive positions. So do you think that to a certain degree, perhaps the IDF simply doesn't have a same level of respect for the press overall, as opposed to just them targeting Palestinian journalists?
I think that's a common tactic, though. I don't think it's anything specific. I don't think it's like a new thing they've done. I don't think they're the only people done it. I think trying to leak false information to your, you want to call them enemies or your opponents, I think that's a very common tactic.
I think it's a common tactic, but I do not think that it is commonly done using independent international media.
Yeah, I would say Israel has no respect for the media. And there's one more thing with the media I want to bring up. This is an NPR article. Israel uses cover of U.S. election to destroy Palestinian homes. Israeli authorities demolished a rural Palestinian hamlet in the occupied West Bank on Tuesday, which this Tuesday was in November on the election. More than 70 structures were destroyed, making it the largest single demolition in the past decade. A lot of people speculate that the timing was because they were going to use the cover and chaos of this most recent 2020 election in order to try to avoid any media coverage of this destruction. Israel just has no real respect for the media. They don't want any media coverage of what's happening. And then they manipulate the media into trying to spread its lies for military gain, which, I'll be honest, I can respect that one, at least spreading lies to the media, because it forced it forced Hamas into defensive positions, and then Israel could more easily target Hamas. I respect that a little bit more because that way they're targeting Hamas instead of just random civilian buildings. So
that is a good point. Yes,
I don't have as much of a problem with that as I do with just straight up blowing up the press buildings and trying to use the cover of other major events to try and hide what they're doing.
I have a couple things I'd like to ask. First of all, Jimmy, as a member of the media now, do you feel manipulated?
I feel manipulated by Israel?
Yeah, now that you're a member of the media.
Yeah, they keep sending me emails. They're like, please don't give us bad coverage. Your radio show is the best show in Alaska. We really don't want to take the hit, but I'm duty bound by honor to bring the truth. So,
and then just and then just in the targeting, my point, and this remains my point, is that you're fighting an enemy that likes to hide in civilian structures. That's a tactic they widely use.
That's not an excuse for targeting civilian buildings, though.
It is when you need to take out your enemy.
No,
and I would argue that the moment that you're complicitly letting people hide in your civilian buildings, they're no longer considered civilian buildings.
Kyle Kalinske of Secular Talk, it's a YouTube channel. He used this sort of example to explain why it's bad. Let's say there were terrorists in like your local school. There were terrorists hiding in the building. If the police were just like, sorry, we can't save the children, we have to blow up the entire school, no one would be okay with that. You have to make civilian lives the priority and then try to take out the terrorists.
My counter argument to that would be that if that happens, one or two times, then that's a hostage situation. It happens one or two times. It happens over and over and over again. It's a pattern of behavior and a repeated tactic.
Yeah.
And it's not like you can just kind of go into the building and just kind of take out, whoever, because they're either, behind enemy lines or even sometimes hundreds of miles behind enemy lines. And just logistically getting in there is impossible.
Yeah, but it's still not an excuse for targeting civilian buildings, and especially when the stats for their killings are so bad. Like in 2014, they had Operation Edge, which was a big fight with Hamas, I believe. And Operation Protective Edge, 2,000 Palestinians were killed, and over 70% of them were civilians. 500 children were killed, and 10,000 were injured. This is not like a couple civilians get in the crossfire. That's 70% of Palestinians killed were civilians. And I'll say this one is from American Friends Service Committee, but there's also an article by The Independent that gave the figure of 80% of civilians, or 80% were civilians. So I understand that Hamas is committing their own crimes by using civilians as cover, but Israel is a nation and should be held to higher standards. And it's going to be hard to try to get around the civilians, but we should hold them to that standard.
Let me ask you a question, and I don't have an answer to it. Do you think that Hamas is just as complicit in the killings as Israel is in terms of repeatedly using civilians for cover?
Absolutely.
I have to say no.
That's a tough question.
Here's what I would say is that they are, I feel like it in some ways comes down to a matter of neglect from both sides, because you have Hamas, who is not concerned about not having their military stuff in civilian infrastructure and using civilians as cover. And then you have the IDF, who is also not concerned about the citizenry and the civilian infrastructure. So on both sides, I think civilian lives just don't seem to be a concern.
I would argue that I can see your point, but I would say overall the responsibility comes down to the attackers.
The thing is, what I would agree with you on, Jim, is that I think as a nation, Israel should be held to a higher standards, because if they are willing to view the civilian population on the same level that Hamas is, I feel like that really kind of dampens their position as a sovereign nation, because they're in a way taking the same attitude that Hamas has towards civilians, despite them being a terrorist organization.
And then, I don't know, just one more thing, and I feel like we're kind of talking around the bush a little bit. Hamas is definitely a terrorist organization, but they're also effectively the power and party in Palestine.
Yes.
I know that they have an official government, but, to be real, it's Hamas that, is making, they're the ones in charge.
Yeah, they're the de facto
government.
De facto government.
I mean, they were elected, which is an interesting part of it.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but I read that they claim power in the region, but then the other group, the Fatah, they're the legitimate government and they're recognized internationally, but maybe not so much in actual ruling power. It might be more Hamas.
Well, then this is where it gets pretty hard to. This is where it gets hard to get an accurate read on the situation. And I think it's believed that Hamas is, not universally supported, but has a wide support within Palestine. That's where it's, hard to say one way or another, just because Hamas, like you were bringing up with Israel earlier, I think Hamas to a much greater degree controls the press out of there. I think internationally I know that there's third-party groups that come in and do the body count, so I'm not gonna discredit those or raise doubts about those. But I think a lot of the numbers that Hamas puts out are internationally doubted, if I'm correct on that.
Which numbers are you talking about?
Just in terms of Hamas will put out this bombing killed so-and-so people, or we weren't in that building, or it was all civilians in that building. And without a third-party recognition, I think it's hard to take their word on that.
I can understand that, but I think most recently we had the third-party recognition of
the
Associated
absolutely.
Press and Al Jazeera.
Right.
What was your question earlier? Is it if Hamas has responsibility in the civilian killings?
I think I said if they're just as complicit as Israel in it. If they bear the same responsibility in it.
Okay. No, never mind. I'll just cut this part out.
Well, here.
Okay.
Let me give you an analogy. Let's look at how we do it in America. I got the big America flag behind me.
Oh boy.
In America, how we do it in the homeland is we have a very clear segregation of where our military is housed and where our general population is housed. We have military bases that are bordered off from the rest of the population where we house military complexes. There is absolutely no mingling. Of course, you can get on and off base, and there's, families of soldiers on base. But like the large, where we have our, storage, weapon storage, missile launching facilities, those are very much segregated from civilian populations. If you were to attack America and take out a military site, it wouldn't be a guarantee, but there'd be almost no civilian casualties in there just because of how separated they are from the rest of the population.
But I think it's also on the side of Hamas, it's also kind of an act of desperation because there's such an asymmetry of power with Israel. I got a number here. It's like 3.3 billion most recently. And
Hamas doesn't really have the ability to separate their infrastructure.
Washington gave Israel 3.3 billion in security assistance and 500 million for U.S.-Israel missile defense cooperation, and that was in the COVID relief package. It's also an act of desperation, just on the side of Hamas.
So then, do you think the ends justify the means of that tactic?
No, I don't.
If it's an act of desperation, I mean, you could just not do it.
I don't think the ends justify the means. I think that it's not effective, especially when Israel does not really care.
You need to hold the civilian population above all else, and neither sides are doing that.
Yeah.
Well, here would be my counter argument to that, and I think this is a good transition to the press. Is that So we have the situation: Hamas houses or uses civilian structures, whether or not it's all they do or just part of the time. They do it. So you have one option to either take them out, one option to not take them out. Right now, the option is to take them out, and you have Palestinian casualties. The other option would be to not take out the sites, let them operate, or try less effective tactics of a ground invasion. In which, if you do that, it gives more time to evacuate out supplies, and you can debate it, but there will still be more IDF soldiers who are killed in battle. Which, whether or not you're on the side of or not, I think that's another conversation. But you will lose more soldiers in battle. And then if they continue to operate and house weapons, then they fire more missiles in Israel. And then you're trading Palestinian casualties, civilian casualties for Israeli civilian casualties.
During Operation Edge, there were 2,000 Palestinians that were killed, right?
Right.
There were 66 IDF members killed and 7 Israeli civilians. So
yes,
Hamas is just not effective in their attacks. It's not something that I don't know if this is quite right, but it's just Israel doesn't really need to take Hamas that seriously.
Yeah, yes, they do. They fired over 3,000 rockets into Israel over the past week.
The thing I'd say,
the Iron Dome takes out, I think, let me try to find a number because I want to give a run.
I believe it's
90%.
Well, no, I was just saying, even like in times of peace, the Iron Dome, I can't remember how many rockets it takes down a month, but it takes down an enormous amount of rockets every month, even like before this conflict.
Yeah, and the Palestinians don't have anything like that, which is why the civilian death rate is so high.
Right, one side, the IDF, I think is one of the best trained and one of the most, active. They get constant, they're not a dormant force. They get constant experience. Is one of the best trained militaries in the world and one of the best funded, one of the most advanced. And the other side is a terrorist group without those resources.
Exactly. So why do they even need to try to take out Hamas? They are the ones in power. They can try to mediate some sort of peace negotiation, but they don't care.
Hamas doesn't negotiate. Hamas's end game is not. They won't accept a two-state solution. The only thing they would accept is removing all Jews from the area.
Jimmy, Hamas has turned down most peace talks.
They're not going to, even during times of peace, they still operate. It's not like you're negotiating with two countries that are willing to, live with a two-state solution, or, even like a unified one-state solution, because one side has shown that even during times of peace, they'll commit terrorist acts against. And this is where I will use, the Jews, not the Israelis. where, they will take out synagogues, they'll take out areas of high Jewish population, because they want the Jews out of there.
Hello, this is Jimmy, the host of the show, with a quick editor's note. I played a clip here from the late Michael Brooks from either the Michael Brooks show or the Sam Cedar show, Majority Report. I tried to play it over Zoom, but Sam and Tom couldn't hear it. So with the power and magic of editing, I'm just going to put it in here. But keep in mind that they did not get to hear it.
I feel like I'm very progressive on this issue. And in the interest of brevity, I'll just leave it at this.
Yeah. There
is no Palestinian peace plan other than complete capitulation by Israel.
Tell me I'm wrong. You're wrong in actually several really significant ways. So one is that, first of all, let's make the distinction here. The Palestinians that actually run, like the PA, Palestinian Authority, is not only the only upholders of a two-state 67 process and have given into Israel on many, many, many vital policy issues. They're literally like a local Israeli government in the West Bank. So as far as that faction, the governing leadership of Palestinians are the only moderate faction in the whole sort of process, and they're security subcontractors for Israel. So that's crazy. Hamas, first of all, they're very, it's a complete asymmetry of power. But even Hamas has actually talked about essentially like decades-long ceasefires and incredibly extended, quote-unquote, temporary agreements, which would enshrine a two-state process, but in fact, liberate Gaza. Then, and that, of course, doesn't, Hamas has committed great crimes, no doubt about that. We don't need to whitewash anybody, as, of course, is Israel. And then the third faction are people like Marwan Barghouti, who are engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience and BDS campaigns because they say, if you're going to control my life and I'm going to live under you and I'm going to, follow your laws, you're going to control my freedom of movement, then I should have the right to vote and have an assembly. And any person in 2018 that doesn't agree with that premise, whether they be Palestinian or American or Israeli or Sudanese, is my political enemy, period. And we're at a point now where the two states has become logistically impossible because Israel's never stopped constructing settlements. And so the real question is now, just as Ehud Olmert said in 2003 it would be, apartheid or a one-state democracy. And Ehud Barak has said the same thing. And any person who has progressive politics has to support that and work towards the security and the well-being and the democratic representation of every single person in that landmass, period.
Hamas doesn't have any terms for negotiation.
But Hamas...
and I also don't think that you can just kind of ignore them.
If only I could play this clip. He talks about Hamas has tried to negotiate ceasefires with Israel. If only I could play this clip because he's a lot more eloquent than I am. But even Hamas has tried to negotiate ceasefires with Israel.
But you're negotiating with a terrorist group at that point. They have absolutely no credibility. And they have no good faith built up. They have the opposite of it.
They have bad faith.
Yes.
But Hamas, I think, has to recognize that they are not the ones that hold the power. So if they can get a negotiation with
because their
Israel,
only acceptable outcome is to remove the Jews from Israel. That's their mission statement. If you look on their website, go to Hamas.com, go to About Us, and there's their mission statement.
Yeah, for Hamas, it's a matter of life or death. Either they're gonna die doing their cause, or yeah.
You say that, but they have tried to negotiate ceasefires before and tried to negotiate,
and then they continue to fire missiles during the ceasefires.
They don't have ceasefires. Israel won't negotiate.
Even after the 2014, there's a negotiated ceasefire. Since then, even when there's not a lot of like right now, there's a lot of media coverage there. It's considered a more contentious area right now than it's been. But even during times of quote unquote less contention, they're still firing rockets.
And in times of less contention, Israel is still breaking down Palestinian settlements and moving in. It's
right, and they will justify it because Hamas is firing rockets into it.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a reason why Hamas is always firing rockets. Exactly.
I know it's a cycle, but it's just that I see that Israel is the one in power. They're the ones that hold all the power, and they have no desire to negotiate with.
Because you're negotiating with a terrorist group. I think that's what it just comes down to.
Okay, but there's also, you don't have to negotiate with the terrorist group. You could negotiate with the Fatah. You could negotiate with the Palestinian Authority in Israel.
Yeah, the Fatah and Israel have a working relationship.
Because realistically, it's Hamas that's in power.
So the West Bank, which is the other, Palestinian recognized territory that's run by Fatah, is also run by Israel as far as the governing body goes. It's a dual governance over that territory. Fatah has a working relationship with Israel, but Hamas does not.
Well, even Fatah, I'm sure. I know that the Palestinian Authority in Israel has to make concessions to the Israeli government since they have no power. But I'm sure the Fatah also has to.
They do. The West Bank,
most of the land.
The West Bank is, I think, 67% of the governance that goes on is ran by Israel, and 33% is directly governed by Fatah.
So the Palestinians have no real autonomy, which is why Hamas is so upset.
Yes. And just to backtrack a little bit, Sam, earlier you said that Israel and the IDF doesn't really have an option but to target civilian infrastructure. And while I don't disagree with that, I think a lot of the criticism lies not in that's what they're doing, but in that there does not seem to be any active attempt to prevent harm coming from civilians. It seems to be an enactment of total war where, seen as how it would be difficult to protect civilian lives, they have instead chosen to completely disregard them.
I think you got what I said mostly correct. Let me just clarify. I think under the current option or the current situation, if you're not going to bomb, I think you have three options. One is, like you said, to target civilian infrastructure or civilian structures, which is what they're doing. And the other one is not to target them. But the third option, to not bomb, would be a full ground invasion, where you're just going to take the structures by land, which would be an invasion. And so I think you have to choose one of those three options: either continue to let the missiles fly, bomb the civilian structures, or do a ground invasion to avoid the missiles firing.
Well, there's also the option of negotiating a ceasefire.
I really don't think there is.
Would disagree, because we did just see that just in the last week, there was the whole event of them manipulating the press to draw Hamas out and then attack them. So there are tactics that can be used to prevent civilian lives, as we just saw this week. So I don't think it's as black and white as far as your options go. I think you could, if you wanted to, avoid civilian casualties, at least to a greater extent.
And I would just like to put out there, for the record, Israel claims they give advanced warning. Whether or not that's effective or whether or not they actually do it, whether or not it's verifiable, that's their public claim.
Advanced warning doesn't matter. It's illegal to target civilian structures, period.
Yes, I don't argue that. That's a good point.
Well,
yeah, so it is very difficult to choose whether or not to target that infrastructure, but the indiscriminate ballistics, I think, are where the criticisms come into play, in the lack of attempt to downplay civilian suffering.
Okay.
I just don't see, because I don't think you can just continue to keep letting the rockets fly, because again, there's been over 3,000 fired, and even if the Iron Dome has 90% effective, or is 90% effective, which is absolutely insane, 10% of 3,000 is still 300 rockets, making contact with Israeli residential areas, which is also unacceptable.
No, I definitely don't disagree with you there, but I think that's why there is criticism, is that I feel like there's a lack of an attempt to prevent damage coming to civilian population.
Well, it's just such a densely populated area. I think one of the refugee camps that was hit is the 8th, most densely populated area on Earth.
Oh my goodness!
It's incredibly dense.
Yes.
I don't think. Here's what I'll say. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think Israel's anything to gain by targeting civilian structures. If you want to argue that it's a fear tactic, I think they already have that in full effect without bombing. I think they're legitimately trying to take out Hamas sources, but to the extent of whether or not they're going to value taking over a couple Hamas militants over, losing a couple civilians, and in balance with that, I think Jimmy's correct, and they don't prioritize that as much, and they're willing to live with that.
Hello, this is Jimmy once again, editor, host, with the legally required reminder that you are listening to KSUA 91.5 Fairbanks, Alaska. And now back to the show.
I really don't think that they care about civilian life. It's the Operation Edge had a 70 to 80% civilian death rate. They just don't really have an interest.
Exactly. It's all about taking down Hamas.
I don't even know if it's about taking down Hamas.
What do you think it's about then?
Taking over more Palestinian settlements. They're trying to take over the entire area. You can see I have this nice picture up of the Palestinian land from 1946.
So rebuke me if I'm incorrect on your statement here, Jimmy, but you are referring to acts of ethnic cleansing.
I am absolutely referring to ethnic cleansing.
Jimmy, did you read the book I gave you yet?
No, I didn't read
on Israeli ethnic cleansing?
I did not read the book.
I literally gave you the book on it.
I know you gave me the book, but I am a busy guy.
Right.
It's also still at Tom's house.
You came over to my house the other day. It was on the table.
I know. It wasn't on the table. It was on the bookshelf, but maybe I moved it to the table. But anyways, I do want to read it. I just haven't gotten around to it.
Well, I can give you the cliff notes on it.
Sam, are there any points of that book that you can remember well enough to share with us in this moment that would aid to the conversation?
One of them comes back to what we started on, was the taking of the land in the beginning. A lot of it was, like what they're trying to do right now, where they buy the land and then they force the residents out after they bought it, and then they choose who to rent to. And then they offer, land grants or reduced housing prices to Israelis and Jews to move into the area. It is most certainly ethnic cleansing, but it's like I think it's closer. When most people think of ethnic cleansing, they think of, coming in and executing populations, which isn't what's going on there. It's going in, either buying the land or forcing people out through, to put it mildly, are questionable tactics, and then kind of forcing them out. But that's what's been going on. So you see the land continuing to recede. So, the first one you can see, they're small. If you scroll back up, I'm trying to zoom in on my screen.
Sorry.
You see it's, mostly, I think it was still British Palestine at that point. But you can see pockets of land where Israelis have come in and they bought that land. And there were also, there were war crimes committed during that as well, in other areas. But then since then it's kind of been, continuing to buy land, move in. And then, when there's a contested area, moving in and taking it. So
there's also the argument to be made that even if it was all done legally, they're going in and they're paying nice prices for Palestinian land and then evict them, whatever. There's still the argument to be made that it's at the expense of Palestinian well-being and Palestinian health. And if we look at this article from 2017, 90% of Gaza's water unfit for domestic use, UN warns. The Palestinian territory will be uninhabitable by 2020.
I happen to know something about water treatment, Jimmy.
Well, we're not dealing with copper pipes here. We're dealing with salinated water.
Well, maybe that's their problem. Maybe they should use some more copper pipes.
I think most of their water treatment infrastructure has been destroyed at this point, copper or not.
There's that. There's the fact that Israel isn't vaccinating any Palestinian citizens or settlers. This article from The Guardian talks about how...
What's the date on it?
It's pretty recent.
April 9th.
April 9th. They were vaccinating all Israeli citizens except for Arabic citizens. They're vaccinating all Israeli citizens. They weren't vaccinating settlers in Palestinian lands, which the IDF has military control over, so it's their duty to vaccinate these citizens.
Jimmy, are you bringing up these points because you are implying that these points here, as well as the indiscriminate killings of civilians in civilian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, are contributing to ethnic cleansing?
The point I'm generally trying to get at is just that even if Israel was taking all the land from the Palestinians legally, which I don't think they are, but even if they were, it's still at the expense of the health of Palestinian citizens. And there's a couple other facts that I wanted to mention. The infant mortality rate is 5 times higher for Palestinians than Israelis. An Israeli on average lives 10 years longer than a Palestinian. Even Palestinian citizens of Israel have a shorter average life expectancy than their Jewish Israeli counterparts. And it's entirely possible for the Israeli government to take care of the Palestinian citizens and the Palestinians that aren't living in Israel, but they have no interest in it. And Israel tried to send out thousands of vaccines to countries that moved their embassy to Jerusalem instead of vaccinating Palestinian citizens. The general point I'm trying to make is that even outside of the war, Israel has no interest in the well-being of Palestinians.
Here's what I would like to say, Jimmy, is if the point you're making is that the Palestinians need more aid and are living under horrible conditions, I don't think any reasonable person will argue with you on that or even debate you on that. And so I agree with, all of that. I also think that, they should receive aid from other places as well. I don't think, I think they could use aid from some of their neighbors. I don't know if I think Israel shares the majority of it.
Trump.
Other countries that like to come in and claim that we should be doing more for the Palestinians. A lot of them don't provide any aid at all.
Okay, I just want to mention really fast that the U.S. Trump stopped sending aid to Palestine, but Joe Biden reenacted it, and it was only like $300 million or so dollars. And if you remember, this year we gave them $3.3 billion.
I would imagine most of that's military budget, though.
That's not an excuse.
Well, just that military cost. I think you could do a lot with $300 million. I don't know what the numbers go to. I don't know what they get out of that. I won't debate it at all. But I would also say, $300 million. I don't think that's a drop in the hat either.
Well, it's nowhere near the amount that Israel is receiving, and the U.S. I would argue is complicit in the civilian killings and the state of Palestine, since we send in so much military funding. Not all of it's defense. It was $500 million was specifically for missile defense, and $3.3 billion is probably just whatever they want to do with it. That's my speculation.
I'll agree with you on that.
But America is complicit in what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and that's part of what makes me so upset about it, is that America seems to have no interest in solving the problems that we created.
That's where I will object. I don't think it was America that created it.
Okay, I said created. I didn't mean created, but I would say we're complicit in it, at the very least.
I think that's fair. I don't think 300 million is a drop in the hat. I think it's probably a longer conversation we have time for. I don't know what you get out of 300 million.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not going to.
I know that I could personally use 300 million right now. I think I can get a lot.
Yes, me too.
But I'm not sure what you get for that.
My bigger point is just that the big disparity between the funding that Israel gets, which is a nation that is doing just fine for itself. They're not an ally. We don't have a treaty with Israel. We just give them money.
And they give us a lot of intelligence in the region.
Yeah, but that's not an ally.
I think they're an ally.
They're not.
I don't know how.
They're not an ally legally. They also.
Sorry, what am I claiming?
No, Tom's going to come in for me. Tom's going to help me out.
Israel is an American ally.
Israel is an ally in the sense that it gives America a foothold in that territory of the world where it would otherwise not have one.
But they're not an ally to us because they're not beholden to us. They also receive most of their guns from China. They receive funding from Russia as well. Tom, is that right? Can you fact check me?
I believe the situation was that Israel produces weapons for China. And now, I would say that they are an ally in the sense that America is interested in having somebody who has received their support have a presence in that territory of the world. It is beneficial to America to have a friendly nation to them, as that area, it does have a lot of contention for the U.S. historically.
But we could have an ally in the Middle East without destroying Palestinian settlements. We could imagine. Just imagine for a second.
You're conflating two things.
Imagine for a second if we had an ally in the Middle East that we didn't try to overthrow the government for, or we just like had a peaceful allyship in the Middle East.
Do you want to name a peaceful government we could try to reach out to?
I mean, Jimmy, previously back in the 1960s, we had a pretty good relationship with Turkey.
Turkey's a bad country, though. Turkey's just as bad as Israel.
They're no longer a current ally of ours, but they were historically.
It's a history of America being complicit in crimes, like Saudi Arabia. I don't support Saudi Arabia either.
Right.
So it sounds like that there aren't very many good options.
Here's where I'll give you a Jewish perspective here, because again, Israel is officially a Jewish state. I don't think it should be personal. That's another conversation. But America has a second, or I can't remember. Does America have a larger population of Jews than Israel? I can't remember. Either way, they're 1 and 2. So outside of Israel, America is the closest thing to not a Jewish state, just in terms of, where there's a lot of Jews at. So, in terms of another country giving support, I think that's where a lot of it comes from as well. I think it's a close relationship as well. I think I don't know if Canada or France has the third or largest population of Jews, but by a wide margin, it's Israel and America.
I could be wrong here, but I think support for Israel by Jewish Americans is pretty low.
It's very no.
Am I wrong?
So yeah, I don't have a number. I can tell you from, this is my reporting on the ground, is that you get a very wide range of opinions. You have some people, again, it comes down to,
I'm totally wrong. Never mind.
To ethnic Jews and religious Jews. So I think what you'll find, this is the short version of it. What you'll find is that I would say most American Jews probably agree there should be a state of Israel and that it should be a safe place for Jews. And then where you get disagreements is, how you should be treating the Palestine. So most, at least, again, I'm associated with Reform Jews. For those of you who are unfamiliar, those are, we're kind of the least religious Jews out there. Whereas you have like the Orthodox and the Hasidic who are, follow, everywhere the Bible or the Torah, you'll see them, wearing kippahs around and tefillin. Whereas, they're much more inclined to say, yes, we should have one state, Israel should take the land, it's justifiable. But if you look at Reform and even like conservative Jews, you'll find much more mixed support and even more support for the Palestinians and the Jewish actions.
Yeah, when you say conservative actions. When you say conservative Jews, do you mean like Republican?
Conservative is kind of no. Okay. So conservative Jews it's religious conservative. So, again, like Reform Jews, things you can grasp onto. Don't wear yarmulkes outside. Gay people can be rabbis, women can be rabbis. Don't keep kosher. Women are just as important as the men. And then on the Orthodox and Hasidic side, you see the opposite of that, and conservatives are kind of in the middle. So some of them might keep kosher. Some of them might wear yarmulkes around, but, it's kind of, maybe the Torah isn't God's word, but a lot of it did happen is where you'll find, conservatives.
Okay. I was just thinking of like Republican Jews like Ben Shapiro, who they're just like completely wrong. They'll say you're racist if you don't support Israel, which is just...
That's a minority opinion.
I know, but
in my experience,
it's just annoying to hear that.
Yeah, I think most Jews don't like Ben Shapiro.
I don't think most people like Ben Shapiro.
Most people don't like Ben Shapiro.
I hear Ben Shapiro has a 30% approval rating in his own family. Here's where we agree. I think we agree the Palestinians are horribly mistreated and that civilian bombings are bad. I think we agree to the extent that they're justified or unjustified. And to be clear, I don't think they're justified. But here's where I come in. I think this is where we differ. Because I think the alternative to it is that if you're less aggressive in your tactics, then you get more terrorist attacks in Israel. So it's not like you can just stop bombing. It's not like you can just stop, going in and doing raids. Because if you cease doing those tactics, Hamas gets a bigger foothold. They get more of can have a larger operation and send more rockets and more, terrorist attacks in Israel. So it's not a stop completely and, everything will be fine. It's that you stop completely and then Israel is subject to more attacks. And I think your argument to that previously was, Israel is more developed. The attacks are much less extensive. Just because you can ward off an attack doesn't mean you should excuse it happening. So again, we looked at 3,000 rockets being fired into Israel. Even a 90% effective rate is still 300 rockets getting through. Do you have this Israeli casualty numbers on them? I know they're not anywhere as high as Palestinians. I had them up a second ago.
I have it for protective edge. I don't have what's happening now, but it's still completely different.
I want to say it's like in the 60s
for Palestinians,
for Israeli casualties in this conflict.
I'm gonna fact check you on that. Can you?
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now too. I'm looking it up right now too.
Okay.
Oh no, it's 10 right now. Maybe 60s is for a PAX conflict.
Well, it's the one I said earlier. Protective edge. It was 66 IDF members and.
Oh, okay, yeah.
6
so again,
civilians.
Let's look at, we don't have a lot of borders. We have Canada and Mexico. Let's look at Mexico. Let's say Mexico was firing rockets repeatedly into the U.S. and the U.S. has killed, 3,000 Mexicans or 2,000 Mexicans, and they've killed, 60 Americans. Do you think America as a country would let 60 U.S. deaths go without rebuttal?
I think that's too simple of a way to look at it. I think you have to look at the conflict surrounding it. And in my opinion, I'm going to just go back to Israel. In my opinion, since Israel's the one that holds all the power, it's their responsibility to try to work out negotiations.
You're essentially trying to, again, I like the America-Mexico, just because it's something, you can look at as, kind of an area we're more familiar with. You're essentially trying to negotiate with the cartel. I don't think Hamas is trying to negotiate. I don't think you can trust Hamas. Even during times of ceasefires, there's still terrorist attacks. And so I don't think there's any real negotiation. And even when we do have negotiations, was there a conflict, I think previously in 2006, 2007, and there was the one in, 2014. Now here we are in 2021. It's like every 6, 7, 8 years, another conflict breaks out. And so even the negotiations, might lead to, a more relaxed time for a couple of years, but not a time of peace by any means. And then you're right back to the conflict.
So, Sam, I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Do you think that Israel not signing the Geneva Conventions then is a good thing for them in their position, so that way when they are doing these things, they are not committing war crimes that they
I don't think it means
not
anything.
to commit?
I don't think it means anything. I think for the most part they abide by it either way.
The Geneva
I know we have a lot of arguments about the civilian bombings. I think we talked about that already. I still think most of them are justifiable.
It's under international law. It's not. It's civilian.
We do have a lot as things have continued to escalate. We do have more and more outside nations condemning the attacks on Gaza.
Right, but again, it goes back to not that I'm not saying you should be doing it. I'm just saying the alternative to not bombing is either doing a full ground invasion, which I think most people don't support even more than the bombings, or the alternative is to, let them continue operating and continue firing rockets into Israel. I think that's the alternative. You're not trying to take out Hamas.
And again, I think there would be alternatives where we do see other options where they are targeting Hamas in a way that doesn't hurt the civilian population, though.
And I think that's a ground invasion. I don't how else would you take them out other than going into the buildings physically?
Well,
and then at that point,
in the case of the current media scandal, that was a military. It was an intelligence manipulation where they got Hamas to come out of hiding to defensive positions, and then without even entering Gaza, had warplanes going.
Right, and that's just a bombing that was more effective, or without
Right, but my point being that you can do those things in such a way where they are not targeting civilians as much.
Do you think Hamas will do that again? Well, not at all. Just letting them continue to operate again, then you're putting Israeli lives at danger. at risk.
I mean, I think if Israel says that they're going to perform a ground invasion, you kind of have to believe them, because if you don't believe them, that's an even worse scenario.
So let me ask you this. Do you think if Israel came in again and said, we're going to do a ground invasion, do you think Hamas is going to fall for it again?
The same trick twice? No, probably not. But the thing is that this is a thing that has occurred that demonstrates that there are methods that are effective at reducing civilian casualties.
I don't know how many tricks Israel has up its sleeve, or even what else you could do.
Well,
right, but it's not like before this happened, this was like something that was ever discussed. Like this was a tactic that was invented for this.
Yeah, I'm sure Israeli has some good military strategists over there that can figure out a way to not kill Palestinian civilians, especially with all the training from the U.S.
I think if they had that way, they would do it.
They do. They absolutely do.
Like what?
$38 billion of military funding from the U.S. over its history. They have the funding, and they have, I'm sure, the brains.
The only thing I would be able to offer up is if they could somehow, if they could have the intelligence to locate and pinpoint Hamas leaders.
They're in civilian areas, and that's where we're right back to square one.
Okay. Well, as the moderator, I'm going to step in, and I'm going to say, I think we're talking in circles now. So we can just, I think we can do some. Yeah, just like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we're just going in circles.
Well, there's one more option they could try.
What is that?
I know. Look, the Jews have this technology, and they actually use it to start the wildfires in California. They could fire the space laser.
Yeah, I've heard.
Just take out the entire strip in one press of a button.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna be a target of IDF after this, but I'm gonna expose it. The Jewish space laser is very real. We're not afraid to use it.
I've only heard legends.
Yeah, I'm gonna confirm it.
Well, let's just do our closing statements for this part, and then we'll take a look at some propaganda really fast. Because
does anybody have like a final ideal solution?
Solution? I don't think there is one.
I don't think the two-state solution is a possibility anymore. I think it has to be.
As long as Hamas is there. And as long as Hamas is supported by the Palestinians.
As long as the Israeli government is there, I don't think there's a two-state solution.
Right. Oh, this is another interesting point.
Oh no.
Right. So this is where I think some of my education comes in. This is where you have Israel with its purpose of being a majority Jewish country. If you were to merge into a one-state solution, I think the estimate is that very quickly in terms of 20, 30 years, would no longer continue to be a one-state solution with Arab, Palestinian, and maybe even Persian immigration into the country. And then at that point, you have to re-examine, whether Israel should be a majority Jewish state or not.
Well,
and kind of at what point that happened. So I think that's one of the biggest concerns of a lot of members of the Israeli government.
I just say that the one-state solution isn't possible anymore just because of how much land Israel has taken from Palestinians. Oh, did I say one-state solution isn't possible? I mean, yes. a two-state solution isn't possible because of how much land has been taken.
And I would also like to add in, just because, the two-state solution is, I would argue, has continued to, house, whether complicitly or incomplicitly, I think that's a word, terrorist organizations to go into Israel and carry out attacks.
The thing I would offer up in this part of the conversation is, I don't know if Israel is interested in a two-state solution.
I think you'll find mixed opinions on it. I think you'll definitely find some Israelis who are, and you'll find others who aren't.
Yeah, but the leading authority probably is not interested. Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't.
No, he is most certainly not. He is most certainly not.
Yeah. If they were interested in a two-state solution, I think they would stop having presence in the governing powers in the West Bank and let the Fatah just handle themselves.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think they're exactly, not the Fatah specifically, but just the West Bank. Maybe in comparison to Gaza, it's more peaceful, but I don't think by any means it's a paradise or anything.
No, but it's at least it's willing to work alongside Israel. But I think if Israel was interested in Palestine having sovereignty, they wouldn't be controlling 67% of the government processes there.
Right. Here would be I don't think a two-state solution is possible. I agree. I think a one-state solution would be the only end to it. And I think this is where you would have to rewrite or amend part of the Israeli constitution, because I think it's in there that it has to be a majority Jewish state. Completely remove that. I don't like theocratic states at all. Not that Israel is a theocratic state, but I think they still do have certain Jewish laws in there. I think completely remove that, become a secular country. And then this is where I think you would lose a lot of Israeli support, is I think it'd have to be like a heavy police state. I think you would need a lot of surveillance, because under a one state solution, first of all, you would have members of Hamas who make it in, who are probably going to try to carry out terrorist attacks. But also, just as importantly, I think you would find a lot of racist Israelis committing hate crimes against Palestinians, and I think they would have to be just as punished as the terrorist attacks that are brought out. So essentially, you'd enter a highly police state and a lot of surveillance to try to prevent attacks both ways. And I just don't think you're going to find support for that on either side.
Yeah,
but that's the only way. That's the only, and then just let time heal it. Realistically, that's the only way out of it I see, without Israel just completely invading Palestine, which I personally think is probably the inevitable future.
Yeah. There's no ideal path forward, but there is. I think what Sam said is maybe close to what the best way forward would be. So now, for real, let's do some closing statements about what, I guess, just say what your opinion is, what you want people to take away, and I'll go first. I'll be the brave one that goes first. Israel is the one that holds the majority of the power in the region. It's their duty to try to lead negotiations, or at least get a mediator like Egypt to try to lead negotiations. It's Israel's duty to reduce civilian casualties as much as possible, which, in my opinion, they don't really care about civilian life, which obviously Hamas doesn't either. But with such a large power disparity, it's Israel's doing most of the civilian killings in the region. And with America funding Israel, like almost 10 times as much funding to Israel than Palestine in aid, America's partly complicit in the terrible conditions that Palestinians are living in today.
I just have one point. I know this isn't the time for debate, but you just mentioned, like Egypt coming in and doing a negotiation. They tried doing that, I think, in 1980 with Sadat, and he basically turned his back on the Palestinians and then was assassinated over it.
Oh, well...
I think Jimmy said that because historically, after the Yom Kippur War, they did act as mediator after acknowledging Israel as a country.
And Egypt's pretty much abandoned them since then.
Well, at this point, the whole Arab League is kind of abandoned.
Yeah.
Not important. We don't have time to get into that.
Right. Tom, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. As far as closing statements go, I feel like both sides have a gross disrespect for the suffering of the civilian population. I think that I know Israel has not signed Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions, but if they want to be seen, if they want to not be compared to their enemy, I think they need to be the bigger organization in the conflict and at least attempts to make more strides in what is obviously a very difficult, if not nigh impossible scenario. As well as if they were interested in the livelihood of, Palestinians in general, they would allow the West Bank to have more sovereignty. But overall, it's just a very terrible scenario for the true victims, those being of the civilian population who have no right to be wrapped up in this scenario.
Yeah, I want to add Tom's closing statement as an addendum to my closing statement as well.
Again, I'm not going to argue that it's tragic, the fate of the Palestinian civilians. I would also just like to bring in, as I think a lot of people are forgetting about, the Israeli civilians. Even though the numbers aren't as high, I think that's mostly a function of, Israel kind of, preparing for stuff like this for the last 60 years and receiving a lot more funding. I don't think that you can look at just comparing the raw death numbers as saying like they should just stop completely and just kind of weather the blows. I don't think weathering the blows is a solution. I think as long as Hamas is there, and as long as Hamas continues to utilize civilian areas for military operation, you're left with, only three options. One being to do nothing and just kind of continue to let them operate and carry out terrorist operations on the state, which I think is unacceptable. Your second option is to do what Israel's doing right now, where they're exercising and doing targeted military strikes and just kind of accepting if civilians are caught up in the middle of it, then that's the price of war. Or the third option, I think, would be a physical taking out of those military sites, which would include a ground invasion, which I think from what I've seen, like what a lot of people say, in terms of kind of the debates that have been going on in the last couple of days, would be even less desirable than the targeted strikes. So I think what I've seen a lot of public commentary is that, Israel shouldn't be doing strikes at all. I don't think not striking is a solution, like they make it out to be. So I think you have to take action, and then what that action might be, I think, is up to debate.
I agree with that statement, Sam. There should be 0 civilian casualties in the entire region, right, for both sides. I feel like that's the end goal. But yeah, I do not think that you can stop doing targeted strikes in the current climate either.
And I think there's a lot of great Palestinians there as well. But Hamas does continue to receive support from, people in the Gaza Strip as well. So it's not like they have the people there hostage. I think they probably have they probably have a decent number of them who are kind of there. I wish they could get out, but I also think they receive a lot of support.
I think as an elected organization, I think the main perception in the Gaza Strip and those, especially going on during these conflicts with the attacks from Israel, have to be more of a perception of fighting for their lives. Right. Because they are in the middle of the conflict. So I feel like that's how they view it.
Closing statements are done. No more politics.
Now I think Jimmy's a liar and he can't be trusted. I'm going to add an addendum.
My addendum is that I don't think you should be supporting Turkey, Jimmy.
I never said I supported Turkey. I said the opposite of that. When did I say that?
When you decided to use a Turkey news source.
I didn't know it was from Turkey. It's AA.com. How am I supposed to know?
I heard, Jimmy, you're against DC statehood. Why are you against that, Jimmy?
I don't know where you heard that. I'm pro DC statehood, as well as the other territories that we have, like Puerto Rico.
And why do you always say so many bad things about Puerto Rico while nobody's listening?
It was when I bought something off of eBay from Puerto Rico. They just sent me a bunch of sand.
You should hear what this guy says off air.
I'll leave this all in. I don't care. My goal is to get canceled and then get kicked out of school. So
Clueless Joe.
Yeah. So
this is the New York Post.
Oops, yeah, this is an article from the New York Post. I had heard about the New York Post before. I never realized how bad the New York Post was until I read this.
I would like to add in, I read them a lot because they publish a lot about the Yankees and the Knicks.
I'm sure their sports stuff isn't like as bad as their politics.
It probably is. It's pretty horrible.
Oh, this is.
Jimmy, I have a question, actually.
Okay.
Very important one. Your radio show lasts about an hour, correct?
It's an hour and a half. No one goes after me though, so I can go for as long as I want. We could talk for like 12 hours.
Jimmy, do you think that you were what's the word? Power hungry? Power mad?
Let's talk about the next playoff run for 12 hours.
Wait. What? Power hungry?
By suggesting that we continue to prattle on about Middle East politics for 12 hours.
Tom, you're the one who wants to be mayor. If anyone's power hungry, it's you.
Whoa!
I don't think the conversation about my mayoral candidacy belongs in the conversation about Middle Eastern politics.
No, it does, because when you're mayor, we're gonna make Palestine a sister city.
That's not how that works.
It's not a city.
That's not how that works.
Sister state.
There you go.
Anyways. I just want to highlight...
we should conquer Palestine under Alaska and name it New Alaska. I think it's time Alaska expanded. We don't have enough territory.
I just want to highlight this article from the New York Post. It's from the beginning of the conflict. when people were being evicted, the Palestinians, but it doesn't talk about Palestinians being evicted. It goes straight to Hamas and its terrorist allies have launched more than 1,000 rockets and missiles from Gaza. New York Post doesn't say why, which...
Well, I don't want to say anything, but the New York Post is based in New York, and there's a lot of Jews in New York, a lot of dirty Jews in New York.
Are you saying that Jews control the media?
No, you just said that. Now you're a racist.
No,
congratulations.
Jimmy, why would you say that? I thought you're supposed to be,
You've been canceled. Congratulations.
Biased.
Sam, the Jewish man, is the one who said it first, and I was just probing as a good host.
I'm sorry.
I
have a.
Can I say the K word on air?
Just label Sam as a Jewish man.
Sam identifies as a Reformed Jew.
Yeah.
Anyways,
can I say the K word because of that on air?
No, you can't say that. It's not until after 10 p.m.
I was watching Training Day last night, and when I had subtitles on, and whenever Denzel Washington said the N word, there was an H after it. It was spelled with an H at the end. What if I say the K word with an H at the end? Can I do that?
It's the most violent escalation between the two sides since 2014, but it's entirely Hamas's fault. So Israel has done nothing wrong, according to the Washington Post. And this is my favorite sentence.
New York.
Lefties around the globe are again condemning Israel for self-defense. And this is just the most biased news I've ever read, I think.
Jimmy, I think that's a really good segue into that Israeli IDF military propaganda video that we watched.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, I want to see this.
It does not have audio, so it shouldn't matter if Jimmy's audio can't be heard.
I'll read it out loud for our...
Yes, it is a
listeners.
It's a short video from the IDF, I believe.
Oh, here it is.
On an official source, but it is a video that is designed to help justify the IDF's decisions.
We speculate that this is a propaganda video from the IDF.
There's no reason to assume that, but I mean, it does not have a source.
We're speculating that.
It's very high production value, and it does not have a source.
Okay, so I'm going to start the video, and then I'll read it for everybody. I might have to pause it if I can't read too fast. But
can I spell out your Reddit username for everybody?
No. The video starts, pop quiz. Are you ready? Imagine you're the Israel Defense Force, and you see the rocket being fired from Gaza into Israel.
Jimmy, I think you need to pause it really quickly. The caption there says, rocket being found at Israel from residential area in Gaza.
Yeah, that's important. Rockets being fired from
distinction.
Residential area in Gaza. And this, rockets being fired at Israel from residential area in Gaza. It's another one. And it leads to this, and it's videos of burning cars and buildings. What do you do? A,
call the Ghostbusters.
Nothing. Allow terrorists to destroy Israeli cities. Or B, target the terrorists who fire the rockets. The correct answer is, and then it's a video of a drone strike on civilian buildings. Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists are hiding among civilians and putting everyone in danger. And then the video of something blowing up. Israel will defend itself. Share this video. So Tom and I think it's propaganda because it is. But essentially the message of the video is that Hamas is in civilian areas, and you can either do nothing or bomb civilian areas.
Well, I think the thing is that it's borderline calling for the civilian population to be destroyed.
Yeah, it's saying that the right thing to do is to bomb civilian areas.
Who does that sound like?
It sounds like Obama when he did 90% civilian casualty rate with his drone strikes. Maybe Obama made this video.
That's an A-
for the propaganda aspect.
No, 90%.
Oh, that's true.
He could have done better.
Could have gotten an A+.
The thing I think here is with this video specifically, anybody who is pro-Israel is probably going to agree with it because the surface level message, is sensible.
You should defend
what's
yourself.
Being implied.
I have no problem with self-defense, but this video is just straight up the right thing to do is bomb Palestinian civilian areas. It's just so propaganda heavy, and I thought that'd be fun to share. What's this one? When the anti-Israel trolls call you a Zionist pig. And then it's a picture of a man next to a pig in a detective outfit. It says,
I'm getting heavy Noah vibes from this one.
Better than a fascist pig. And
better a pig than a fascist.
I don't really know what the message is here. If anybody could explain this one.
So you'd rather be a Zionist than a fascist.
Yeah, but like, who's the person who isn't a Zionist is automatically a fascist? Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, maybe it's supposed to be like better a Zionist than an anti-Israel.
I've got it. Okay, so you know how a lot of Jews were called pigs post World War II?
I didn't know that, but I'll.
It was like pig farming was like kind of like for the concentration camps.
There's a lot of money in pig farming.
Yeah, Tom, you just got canceled. Congratulations.
You're canceled.
Wait, oh, no, that's not what I meant. I mean,
congratulations, Tom, you've been canceled. I think that's all three of us now.
Good.
So they're saying they'd rather be a Jew than a Zionist, which I don't really know what that means, but maybe that's...
that makes even less sense than what I said.
It makes as much sense as anything else here.
Okay.
Maybe the point here is that the person really liked the Ghibli movie Porco Rosso and wanted to include it in a way, but they weren't sure how.
That's what the
Get out of here,
from.
Tom. We're not covering that kind of stuff on here, Tom.
Tom, you're canceled for liking anime.
Porco Rosso. I like Porco Rosso. What can I say?
You've been canceled. Maybe they'd rather be a Jew than maybe they think Hamas are fascists. I don't know.
Yeah, but they're not. Don't read this one yet. But it's not. It didn't say Hamas is the ones that are anti-Israel. It's like they said everyone that's anti-Israel is a fascist. That's what I'm understanding.
It just doesn't make any sense at all.
Speaking of memes that don't make sense,
let's go back to that other one.
No, we're saving that one for last because that one's
okay. I didn't read it.
I understand that one the least. It literally makes no sense. Okay. But this is a video of a man running, and it says Hamas when the Israeli airstrike is on the way. And I think the joke here is that the airstrikes have an 80% civilian casualty rate, so there's a lot of civilian deaths.
I think they're just saying they run.
That they like to run.
I think you're reading into it too much.
They just run.
They
just run when the bombs drop.
Yeah, you're right. Okay,
I think
Sam,
you're reading way too much into this one.
Sam, you're right. It's when the Israeli airstrike is on the way, they get really stressed out, so they go for a jog to clear their mind. I think that's what.
No, they just try to run out of the area. I think you're reading too much into that. This looks like Tom when he has something burning on the stove.
How dare you? I've never burned anything on the stove.
Exactly how you run.
And then this one's pretty good. It's from the American Chronicles. I don't know what that is, but on the right, it shows Hamas rockets deliberately targeting innocent civilians intended to cause maximum harm, which
I think I sent you this picture without the meme, right?
Yeah, you did.
It's a pretty good picture.
But that is true. Hamas is targeting civilians. I won't deny that. Then on the left, it says Israel's Iron Dome, defensive missiles deliberately targeting only Hamas rockets to minimize harm and save innocents, which is also true. And then in the middle, in big letters, it says not the same. I think the idea of this meme is that they're trying to not acknowledge any missiles that target any Israeli missiles that target civilians.
I don't know. I think you're reading into this one again.
No, I'm not actually.
No, hold on. I'll agree with Jimmy on this one because I think the thing is that this is taken out of the context of the greater picture. Like everything on the statement is true, but it's framed in such a way that it is showing Israel to simply be a purely defensive state where they are the victim.
Yeah, everything here is true, but they're not talking about any Israeli strikes that are offensive.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
It's showing Israel as nothing but a victim.
They're glossing over the offensive part where they actually do hit civilians.
Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah. Okay, I follow.
This one I would say this one falls under propaganda again. Oh, and by the way, millions of listeners that I have, these are all from the r/Israel subreddit, which has turned very nationalist in the past few days. Except if you look at r/Israel now, it's just a bunch of people from different countries. They take a picture of their passport and say, "I stand with Israel." That's all it's been.
Why Israel doesn't stamp your passport?
I don't know. I'm not asking questions.
Because they didn't stamp. And I can tell you the reason they said they didn't stamp it is because some countries won't let you in if you have an Israel stamp.
Really?
That's
Yeah.
pretty harsh.
So I have stamps from, I think, Germany and I think Belgium from the connecting flights there, but not one from Israel. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, and then for the last meme that I truly do not understand this one. It's the meme format where there's a girl walking towards the camera, there's a man looking back, he's like clearly attracted to her, and then there's the girl on the right that's like disgusted by her boyfriend. Hopefully I explained that well enough. The joke is, well, I don't know the joke, but the girl on the left that's walking away, the quotes are, "Shouldn't they know better? The Fourth Reich. They're exactly the same as the Nazis." The guy that's attracted to her is labeled as progressives, and the girl on the right that's disgusted says anti-Israel is not anti-Semitic.
I figured it out.
Oh, you figured it out?
I just figured it out. Okay. So you have the progressives, and one of the phrases they might use is saying anti-Israel is not anti-Semitic. So they'll say that as a way to defend their anti-Israel stance.
Uh-huh.
And at the same hand, they're also saying these other phrases that are clearly anti-Semitic.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what's getting at.
That took more than a day to figure out.
Tom and I looked at this a few days ago, and we could not.
Really? Because it says posted 10 hours ago.
Well, let me refresh it.
Let
me refresh it. It's
fake news.
Oh, r/Israel is private now. Now I can't look at it because you made me refresh the page.
You've been canceled.
I got canceled from r/Israel.
I wonder if I can join.
Well, you can request to join, but
request to join. Message the mods directly. Tell them that you don't like them.
Tell them Shalom Aleichem.
Well, I'm kind of sad that we don't have that meme anymore, but
did something just happen like during this conversation that it would become private?
Yeah, let's go. I'm gonna go refresh the New York Times.
I've had that link open for a few days, so it just hasn't been loaded in for a while. I think that's all that happened.
44 minutes ago, Israel kills 42 in Gaza.
That's a lot of people. And was that one airstrike?
Israeli airstrikes in Gaza City flattened 3 buildings and killed at least 42 people Sunday. Palestinian medics said the deadliest single attack in the latest round of violence.
Okay, I'm assuming we don't know the civilian death rate as of now.
It doesn't say. It just says 42 people. It does not say if they were civilians or not.
Okay. Well, we'll learn in the future. I don't want to speculate now because there's always a chance that it was mainly Hamas, but just from what we've seen in past airstrikes.
The Gaza Health Ministry said that 16 women and 10 children were among those killed.
All right. Well, that's already pretty bad.
Did that just happen? Because I'm not even seeing it on the New York Times yet.
Yeah. Here's the article that I just found because it just came out. Chat. Here we go. There.
Well, if it's 16, you say 16 children. No, 16 women, 10 children.
Yes.
They're almost certainly not part of Hamas. So that's already about 50%. That's more than 50%, actually. What's 26 divided by 42? 62%. So already that's almost a 62% civilian death rate for that strike.
Well, this says it was three buildings.
Yeah.
In the major downtown.
Well, we'll learn more as it comes out. I'll try not to speculate too much on that, but privately, I'm going to be speculating a lot.
I think the audience at home already knew that.
Yeah, the audience already knows I'm rabidly pro-Hamas.
Okay.
That's a joke.
Now you're canceled a third time.
That was a joke. I am not rabidly pro-Hamas. I'm not pro-Hamas at all, actually.
I heard you were pretty pro-China, though. Why are you always saying so many good things about China, Jim?
I'm okay.
That's not what you were saying last night. You called me and you're going on about China for an hour.
Whoa, what were you were talking about some pro-China stuff there, Jim?
I think we're at a point where we can end it, but just as an aside, I just want to do a quick poll. does anybody here like fully support any countries?
I want to move to Scandinavia.
Like, what do you like? Any countries in the entire world?
Like any countries in the entire world?
I support some countries more than others.
I support America.
I don't support America.
I still think America is the greatest country to ever exist. I truly believe that. The quality of life, scientific advances. I really do believe that.
Okay.
I like the socialized programs in Scandinavia. New Zealand seems to be doing a lot of pretty cool things right now. They get a lot of good press.
Japan has a pretty reasonable cost of living.
I also like Canada, and this is my drop the mic one. I don't support their actions, but I do like Israel.
Oh my god. I might support New Zealand. I don't know if they have any indigenous people scandals. I know Australia does.
I'm sure they do too.
Canada does.
Canada does.
Talking about those kind of scandals. Canada's probably one of the worst offenders.
That's why I didn't say. That's why I would not support Canada. They have some.
Well, if your question is, are there any countries that haven't done anything wrong, Jimmy? The answer is no.
I'm just asking if any country has your full support, and I think, as of what I know right now, I would say probably New Zealand and Iceland are the two that have the closest to my full support, and Greenland. I'm sure nothing's bad has happened in Greenland, right?
Like 50% of Iceland believes in elves. They're just hucking they're hucking the volcanic fumes all day.
Yeah, okay, all right. I've made my decision. I support Iceland.
Yeah, I support Iceland more now.
For real talk, I mean, I feel like I can't say what because like if you're saying wholeheartedly support, that means that the country could come out with any statement and I would be agreeing to it, which is not the case.
Okay, just closest to your full support.
Closest to my full support would be like what Sam said, like Scandinavia, the Netherlands, Lithuania.
Lithuania.
That's a weird one.
I'm a big
really
fan.
Poor.
Yeah, but I feel for them as ex-Soviet satellite nations. I think they're okay. I like them.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
They
were the exile location of Evo Morales while he was exiled from Bolivia.
They used to house a lot of Jews.
Morales. Sorry, what?
They used to house a lot of Jews before World War II.
I'm a big fan of Luxembourg, like I said.
Is Luxembourg where women weren't allowed to vote until the 90s?
That's why
I do not know the answer to that.
What's that really small country by Germany?
Well, there's a few.
Is Montenegro over there? That was closer.
I just spelled
Japan is a pretty nice place, but they do have some policies that I do not support.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vatican City.
I'm a big supporter of Turkmenistan.
I'm a big supporter of Rome.
If Alaska was to declare independence, they would get my full support.
Don Young has my full support.
I think Rome is a nice place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's Luxembourg, super tiny next to Germany.
Oh, Luxembourg. That's what I was thinking of. Luxembourg.
You might have to do research on this in your own time, Jimmy. Luxembourg has never had any issues.
Luxembourg, actually, I think Luxembourg has a 0% homeless rate, which is insane, but it's true.
Because nobody lives there.
Hey.
It's a commuter country. Everybody commutes into the country during the day.
I don't know about that.
I have no, that was a joke.
Women gained the right to vote in the 1919. There was one that was 1990. It was like, I wish I knew.
Couldn't you just Control F for 1990?
Yeah, I'm going to. What's happening?
You're getting canceled.
You are getting canceled. You've said too many words.
Switzerland. 1971 at the federal level, between 1959 and 1990 at the local level. Wow, that's pretty bad.
I can move to the Italian part of Switzerland, to the Swiss Alps. But they have a lot of problems.
Okay, I think...
Little and Big Diomede have my full support.
You support... Tom is sponsored by Big Diomede.
Western Sahara has my full support. I love the desert.
I don't know. I'm sure that there's something problematic.
Come visit me in
that happens
Arizona.
there. Yeah, but realistically
plenty of desert
speaking,
here.
no country doesn't have blood on its hands or have its own problematic policies. Like I don't think that's a
Greenland.
Yeah. If you're talking about universal blind support, then no.
Yeah, I think
Antarctica.
as a critical thinking standpoint, I don't think you can blind support anything. Even as a Catholic, I don't think I can blind support anything.
Except the New York Knicks.
Sure, except the Newport Knicks. I'll agree with that.
New York, not Newport. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I really love the New Jersey Knicks.
They used to be the New Jersey Nets, and now they're the Brooklyn Nets. And nobody likes them.
Jimmy, what about Antarctica? Antarctica is a continent that I can fully support.
Yeah, it has my full support. Absolutely. Beautiful.
What's the name of that really big, European research base? I almost bought a... Okay. Get canceled.
The Zurich. No, that's not right.
You say the Zerg, like from StarCraft?
No, the Zurich. Isn't there a big research laboratory there?
Oh, I don't...
Is that what you're talking about? Are you talking about the
that's
particle
not the
accelerator?
No. There's a big research area in the Antarctic. I don't remember the name of it specifically, but
Oh, I think you said Europe.
no, it's a European research center in Antarctica.
But it's in Antarctica. That doesn't make any sense, Tom.
It's run by Swiss people.
Oh, yeah,
No, Swiss people live in
so
Switzerland.
neutral.
Well, are you saying they become Antarcticans when they move to Antarctica?
They only become Antarcticans if a child is born there, then they become an Antarctican citizen.
You know, I have heard that there's a lot of hanky-panky going on in Antarctica.
Okay.
Whoa. I don't think we can say that on air. I think that covers pretty much everything.
I think we're devolving pretty rapidly.
It covers literally everything that we could talk about.
You probably wouldn't want to cut off the last 20 minutes of this.
No, it'll be fine. I'll keep it in.
Okay.
Oh, I'm disconnecting from the internet, so maybe now would be a good time to end it.
Well, thanks for having me, Jim.
No problem.
Mr. James.
Everybody knows that I love to talk about Israel.
Everybody knows that I love to talk about Israel.
It's true.
I just wanted to talk about the Geneva
read the books I've given you. I've given you knowledge is power, and you're rejecting the power I'm trying to give you.
Well, the only knowledge I need is that Israel did not sign the Geneva Conventions, but
Palestine they said, well, hold on. They just didn't sign protocols 1 and 2.
Debate's over. They
signed protocol 3 though.
They
did sign protocol 3.
We've already talked about this.
Tom, what does protocol 3 do again?
Protocol 3 is that the Red Cross wanted to change its logo, among other things, but that was the main part.
Israel has not signed the Geneva Conventions. This has been the radio show that I'm the host of.
Thanks for having me on for the last episode of your radio show. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm getting canceled after this. Sorry to the director of the radio show.
You?
No, I'm not the director. The director is I don't want to say his name because I don't want people to look him up and give him a bunch of complaints.
That's probably for the best.
See the guy you're always saying bad things about?
No.
Were you talking about his mom instead?
This has been I'll say the show name. I don't want you to ask me what it means, Sam. This has been Brushing My Teeth to Mersbo, political edition.
Can you say that again?
Brushing My Teeth to Mersbo. It's a reference that you're not going to get. So
I'll look it up. You might be surprised.
I
don't get it. But...
I would be surprised if you did get it.
And then, Jim, what's the number of your customer service line for people who would like to offer their own opinions?
They can call in at 474-KSUA. At this point in the radio show, I will have left the studio, so I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, that's the end of the show. Do you want to say a quick slogan, Sam, like Free Palestine?
Nope. I don't want to be canceled.
Okay, I'm fine with being canceled, so. Oh, this is what you sent earlier, Sam.
Oh, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Yeah, Sam sent this earlier.
That was
Sam sent this earlier unironically. He truly believes this.
Very ironically.
It's a TPUSA thing. It says, "Dear Palestinians, you claim to live in these homes, yet I have a gun. Curious. Aviv Kochavi, founder, Turning Point Zionist." And that's just a joke about how Israel is taking all of the Palestinian things. I'll cut this one out, Sam. I won't say that you sent this one.
You did me dirty. Very ironically. Extremely ironically.
I'll cut that one out.